On the left side. On the left side, I want you to write in the top left corner. Shut up. I want you to type absolutism. This is timeline number 4. I know they're just skipping there with exploration that we did in class a while ago, but we will redo that one if there's enough demand and all that other junk. Now, to start out our timeline in the center, it's easy this time. We're just going to do four dates: 1800, 1700, 1600, 1500, equidistant from one another. To start out though, quiet, hey, to start out though, we're going to look first at our clusters, that box in the top part of your timeline. If you don't remember, what we are doing is we're trying to find some kind of common theme. Maybe it doesn't run through every single chapter, but it does run through some. What are the common themes? What are the common themes? There's one above all else that we can put for all of the first half chapter timelines, and that is our feudal system. The old type, the old kind of feudal system, what they did, what they used, what they had, was we had a king on top, but most of the power rested in the nobles' hands. 90% of the people lived in the countryside. 93% of the people farmed. So the local lord, the local noble, really had all the power. This era of absolutism is how are we going to shift so much of that local power and the nobles to national power and a singular monarch, all right? I wrote down in the box for this, I wrote changing status quo. I think is a great term to use for AP. The changing of the status quo. And specifically here, we can go from church/noble rule to what kind of rule? How are we going to decide how countries are ruled now? This is one of those key, one of like the top 5 vocab words for AP Euro. We are going to move to a secular government or secular politics. Secular means, of course, non-religious, and that is extremely different from what all of Europe has been up to this point. We talked about some of the transitions in other units, but is there an issue, Benintendi? You all right? Okay, focus for me. But let's look at some of the background first. First up, in the 1500s, what big event is happening that might lay impact here? Yeah, the Protestant Reformation. You actually remember the dates too. 1517 is when the 95 Theses was posted, and it goes really throughout the 1500s. Cut it out or leave. Good boy. The Protestant, it's not just the Protestant. We've covered it all. I put the Protestant and the Catholic Reformation. Right? Because the Protestants try to change the church refuses to change, so the Protestants leave, create their own religion, their own churches, and eventually the Catholic group realize they're wrong here. The Catholic Church, what do they do when they realize they're wrong? 1545 to 1555, the Council of Trent, where they met and they got rid of the problems that many people had with clergy. Do you remember what problems they had with clergy? Anti-clericalism was the vocab word. We had nepotism. We had simony. We had indulgences, pluralism, along with absenteeism, right? Absenteeism. They fixed a lot of those issues in the Protestant Reformation. But the ultimate outcome of the Protestant Reformation is Europe is now in many ways divided. We have a lot of old Catholic rulers, but we have a lot of newly Protestant people in their country that want change. And whenever you have multiple religions in the same country, or even multiple religions now on the same continent, you will end up with conflict. The other thing that we want to mention from the 1500s as we lead into absolutism isn't actually a thing. It is more of a person. 1558 to 1603 is what? Elizabeth I. Her nickname was? The Virgin Queen. And every time, because you're good students and you listen, when I say the name Elizabeth I in your mind, what do you picture? That one picture, Evan, perfect. What was that one picture? She's in the center, pale skin, very red hair, not hiding it. Her hand is on the globe. Behind her is the king's crown. Over one window and the other, we see two depictions of the same event. In fact, what event is that? Well, because partially of politics, but also because of religious conflict, Elizabeth I, who was what religion? Protestant, right? She had a lot of religious problems to deal with in her country. By the way, how did Elizabeth deal with those religious problems? She said, listen, I don't care what you are, you're not going to be violent towards one another. My Protestants are not going to be violent towards Catholics, and you Catholics are not going to be violent towards my Protestants. And England settles down and is better because of it. But her dead sister's former husband gets really mad because she won't marry him. She won't marry him because as soon as she marries him, she loses all her power. But add into the fire the fact that Elizabeth the Protestant and that man, Philip II of Spain, is very Catholic. Not normal Catholic, he's Spain Catholic, which is really Catholic. So that Spanish Catholic guy sends his armada after Elizabeth in 1588, and all of that gets blown up and sunk, the whole 9 yards. So, there is a couple big points. So I'm going to put these at the very, very top of my timeline, right underneath the status quo section. If you look at my timeline, it's this black writing up here, right underneath status quo. Okay? See, this timeline is very, very packed, so we're going to try and fit everything in. Yes, ma'am?
What is when Elizabeth says that anyone can have, like, do whatever religion?
Yes.
What is the name of?
You are thinking of a different occasion. She asked when Elizabeth said anybody can be whatever religion they want to be, right? There's no name for that proclamation. It's just what she did. What she is thinking of is what country struggled the most with the Protestant Reformation. Austria is not correct, but it's incredibly close. Austria doesn't exist. Germany doesn't exist. The Holy Roman Empire, right? That leader, the Habsburg, at one point, he realizes he, as a Catholic, can't force everybody in the Holy Roman Empire to be Catholic any longer. So what he does is in 1555, he proclaims the Peace of Augsburg. The Peace of Augsburg said local princes can select whether or not they're going to be Protestant or Catholic. And a lot of the Austrian regions stay Catholic. But a lot of these German regions, the home of Martin Luther, they switched to Protestantism. Does that make sense, Rory?
Was that during the Council of Trent?
Yeah, it was actually during. Maybe at the very end, but yeah, same time period. So, these two overarching points in my timeline. Number one are some changes to different areas of society. They start around 1600 and then, I don't know, go here somewhere. But the first one is military advancements. Military advancements. Before this, in our triangle feudal system, what did the military look like? How did it run? Now that we haven't changed the lineup and kill each other, but we have the nobles are who in the army? They're the officers, and maybe even the knights are up here kind of nobly. They're the only ones with armor and horses and all that other junk. But most of the army, think of the beginning of the American Revolution. Who fights at Lexington and Concord? What's the name? What's the name? Start with an M. Minutemen. Minutemen, remember? What do the Minutemen do 90% of the time? Every day, all day. They farm. Or they're blacksmiths. They run normal jobs. It's only when the army is called do they go and temporarily serve in the army. That's nice because people can still do regular jobs and help society, but they're not very good soldiers, they're not very powerful, and you really, really rely on these nobles. When a king wants to call his army, he doesn't have an army. He has to go to the nobles and say, hey, will you get all the peasants in your village to fight? And that gives a lot of power to the noble because the noble can say no, right? We're changing that. And the best term to say that we changed it is now we are going to have professional. We're going to have professional armies. Professional armies means what? Here's a better one, right? Paid. They're paid. Which means they are full-time. And if they're full-time and all they do is soldier, in their downtime, what do they now do? They're trained, right? They're good soldiers. It also means that unlike the farmers fighting with pitchforks, they now can get real guns. They can get effective weapons. But what's the downside? What's the downside of these military advancements? There could be less food, but farming is starting to get a little better. Guys, synthesis, what happens in the 1600s? We don't need as many farmers anymore to get the same, if not more, food. What's the downside of having full-time professional soldiers? It's expensive. The local nobles in the local towns cannot support it. You need, in order to have this, you need a lot of money. How is the army going to get money? It required high taxes. It required high taxes. And in order to run an army of that size, we need to have it under control of the central state. Right, it's real small at the top of your timeline. You need to have it under control of the central state. The one other part, put it right underneath military advancements. Try to give me a little space here on your timeline. The one other part that's around the same timeline. And it really started all the way back with the Renaissance. But what's the other era going in the background of the 1500s and the 1600s? What? Not scientific rev, that'll be 1617, so not wrong, but not what I'm looking for. The Enlightenment, we're going to say 17 on. We just didn't do it, Alvaro. Exploration, very good. In the exploration, do you know how exploration helped to bring down the feudal system? Do you remember? You had it. We have, exactly. There are going to be merchants who now have a lot of money. What's the other job we always talk about? Bankers. I also want to throw in guilds here. Worker. All three of these start to gain a lot of power. And Evan, what do we call these groups? Nuevo Elito, or the new elites. Why are they going to help destroy the old feudal system? Because they are not the old nobles. They are not the old fat nobles sitting in their castle with a pile of gold underneath them, right? They have earned their money, they work, and they don't get political power, right? So if you're a smart leader, and you have these people who have a lot of money but don't have power yet, what are you going to do if you're a smart singular king? You can get these guys' approval and weaken the old stubborn nobles. What do you do with these guys? Yeah. Make him a governor. Or, what's the most common job? Make him a military officer. Right? They get the noble respect, and they rely on you as king. The only reason they're a noble is because you're the king. So we have this new elite. They have new money, and they want to take power of their old nobles. I want to do a synthesis real quick. But if we take these new elite, they're really big in the 1700s. They cause a big commotion right here in one place specifically. France. This helps lead to the French Revolution, right? It helps lead to the French Revolution. Do we remember? It's actually a key concept to list what this new elite is called, what these new nobles were called. Do you remember? Lou? What? Nobles of the road. Just above the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie is usually the upper part of the third estate. The nobles of the road are technically nobles. So they have those legal rights, but they're new nobles. They don't like the old system. They understand its flaws. They will help cause the French Revolution. All right, if you're doing colors, switch colors. Because of this Protestant Reformation, we have a series of violence. Most notably, probably, is the peace of Augsburg right here. We should have written it in this color, just circle it or underline it or something. But the most notable thing happens in Central Europe from 1618 to 1648. You don't need to memorize the first date, but I would know 1648. Because what happened from 1618 to 1648? The 30 Years' War. And to end it is one of our key concepts. To end it, it's the Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia. There's a couple key concept points I want to make. Number one, the medieval church, they're going downhill, right? The political church, you could write, they're going downhill. The other point, what region, what country really is going to suffer because of the 30 Years' War?
Holy Roman Empire.
Holy Roman Empire, where most of it is fought. The Holy Roman Empire, their downfall, this is almost the nail in the coffin. The Habsburgs will still be around for a while, but the Holy Roman Empire essentially, at this point, is going to end. But the big one, put it underneath here if you can, the big one, is this is the last large-scale what in Europe? Religious war. A continuation of that, it is the start of a term that will define Europe for the 1600s, the 1700s, and the 1800s. Really the 1900s also with the world wars. What? Balance of power. It's the start of balance of power. When Louis XIV tries to take over Spain, who has a problem with it? Everybody in Europe, because France would get too strong and upset the balance of power. What else is the rest? When Germany tries to unite, the rest of Europe has a problem with it, but they can't do anything against him. When Napoleon gains all of Germany and starts to gain Russia, everybody has a problem with it because France is gaining too much power. When Germany starts to annex different regions, the rest of the world has a problem with it because they're upsetting the balance of power. All right. But our main point for the day will be, if you're going to talk about absolutism, you need to talk, of course, about Louis XIV. About 1640 or so, he begins rule. I think it's 48 also. I could be wrong. So draw a line right there. And on the right side, you're going to write Louis XIV. That's 14, Colin. But it is a key concept. It is a key concept to know the guys who came before them and why they're significant. There's two people we should know that come before them. One is Cardinal Richelieu. E-L-I-E. Cardinal Richelieu, and who else comes before Louis XIV? Louis XIII. Yeah, you're an idiot. His father or grandfather, I'm sorry. And here's 2 points for under them. They try to centralize. They try to take all the power in France and put it into their kingly hands, but they can't. Why can't they? No. Because the nobles are too strong. That's our lesson for this entire unit. The old elite, the nobility, do not want to lose their power and influence, so they will do just about anything to stop. I do want to also mention one thing from my class. We did did some practice questions today. One of the key points of those questions was an important event early in the life. By the way, there's going to be about 3 things written in this section, so kind of write it small underneath here. If you didn't, don't worry, use a different timeline. What event early in Louis XIV's life had a big impact on him?
The riot.
It's called, the riot or the Fronde. The Fronde was an uprising in the streets of Paris. It's when regular people and some nobility took to the streets. They grabbed their slings, remember, and they flung poo at the king. And he realized this noble rule thing is very simply not working. And he needs to, when he is king, he said, this won't happen. I will control my country much better than this. So, Louis XIV, right next to his name, whenever on every short answer, test essay, anytime you write the name Louis XIV, what do you write next to it? Sun King. You write Sun King, and you explain why he earns that name. Why does he earn that name?
Sees everything, controls everything.
Because he sees everything, and much like the sun, all parts of the empire are completely and instantly dependent on the sun, and they look to him for guidance. He is trying to eliminate the influence of this noble class and try to put himself at the top of this. So what he does is there's 2 really nice vocab words. Well, one vocab word, 1 point. What's the big vocab word we stick with him? His excuse for why he should be the top of that pyramid. Divine right. And guys, I know it seems weird because in our key concepts, I told you we're moving from church and religious rule to secular rule. And yet here I am talking about divine right. Well, this isn't really used by Louis XIV. from a religious sense, he uses divine right in order to get the support of all his people undyingly and completely. But the reason he is ultimately able to become the leader of that pyramid is because he does what? What's our term for him? Everything he does comes back to this point. What was the biggest problem of his grandfather and cardinal? He seduces, do you remember that? He seduces the nobles. Seduces the noble. He's going to centralize power. He's going to build his bureaucracy. So, how does he seduce the nobles? He builds the Palace of Versailles. What is the purpose of building the Palace of Versailles? Because now you take all those old nobles who have all that power and influence and you get them away from their castle. You get them away from your pile of gold and you require the nobles to come visit once a year minimum, usually twice a year, so that they're around your presence, they see how things get done, and they start to give up power to you. He sent a couple words you might want to write. Centralized power, put that down. Centralized power. And a good vocab word for any essays is when he takes this pyramid, he not only removes a lot of the nobles' influence and puts it all up. What else does he do with this pyramid? He makes it bigger. No, he makes it bigger. More control for government. What do we call about all the parts of government? We put them in one word.
Bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy. He expands the bureaucracy. He expands the bureaucracy, okay? And everything connects to him. We like to talk about how fun it is that he's at Versailles and people watch him poo, and then he goes out in the afternoon and he dances with a big sun on his back. But in between that morning ritual and his afternoon banquets from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. every single day, what is he doing? He goes to the back room, he meets with his upper ministers that he trusts, and he makes decisions and runs the government of France. And is he good at it? There's nobody better. Perhaps in all of European history, there's nobody better. France becomes the greatest country in Europe, really in the world, under the rule of Louis XIV. And that kind of brings us to our problem. This is getting ahead. But France, at the end of his rule, is really, really high. If you look at the timeline, it's really high. What's going to happen to France over the next 100 years? They're going to drop. And one of the reasons is all of his sons, or his grandson, when his grandson grows up knowing he's going to be king one day, what does he see his grandfather doing? He sees him partying, he sees him at banquets, he sees all the nobles loving him. He does not see all the work that Louis XIV does to actually run the country. So, another good word is this is deficit spending, right? Deficit spending done really, 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 really well. But the last vocab word for Louis XIV, by the way, this should extend wherever you are. He dies in 1715. That's a really good date to know. Maybe not the exact year, but be kind of close. Because that's the moment France starts to go down. And the reason France starts to drop off really does start under Louis XIV. In 1714 about, the Spanish king dies. And Louis XIV says, I'm the most powerful king around. I also claim Spain for my rule. And he ends up fighting the War of Spanish Succession. What Louis XIV doesn't quite realize is this is going to be the first major European war since the 30 Years' War. And what's changed now? We no longer care about religion. Now we care about balance of power. So who has a problem with France, with the King of France suddenly ruling France and Spain? England, because they hate France and everything it does. Portugal, because now you've got a big bully on your borders. What's left of the Holy Roman Empire, and certainly Austria, all the Germanic states, even the Italian states. Everybody has a problem with this. And Louis XIV finds him fighting everybody. So the War of Spanish Succession is right? Spend a lot of money, don't make any back. That's Louis XIV. All right. Let's sidestep over to one boring region. It's only two key concepts, so it'll be easy to cover. Let me know what the boring region is. Holy Roman Empire drops. Holy Roman Empire drops. Now, as the Holy Roman Empire drops, it starts to split into two major regions. The first one is Prussia. Do you guys remember the names of any of the rulers of Prussia? Frederick. Harry, you don't have to come to these. You're not actually in my class. Okay, good. Shut up, Harry. Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great, or his son, Frederick II. Okay? The other country that the Holy Roman Empire splits into is what? Austria. Do you guys remember the ruler we talked about of them? Gold star if you remember, because she's small. Maria Theresa. Good job, Argus. Gold star. Now, what is the name for these leaders? They're absolute monarchs. Are they good ones or bad ones? We like them. We call them the Enlightened monarchs. What does an enlightened monarch do? What? I don't know what you said. Education is enlightened monarch. Religious freedom is enlightened monarch. Basically, they're still absolute monarchs, but they're doing relatively good stuff. Okay? That's great. That's our boring one. Now on to the best one. If you can fit the best one under Louis the XIV, please do so. What color for the best one? We already did that one. We already did that one. Let's do. Where did you just do? You just did orange. Yellow. The bestest of the best monarch is about the same time as Louis XIV. He is done. I think he lives a little longer. I think he's still the 1720s to the 1730s. But if you've had my class, you know the bestest of the best is who? Peter the Great. Okay? Peter the Great, we learned a lot about him, but what we remember learning especially was that he, in his younger days, he grew up educated. He will leave Russia and he goes and he travels through Europe. And while he's traveling through Europe, he learns a lot. But what he primarily learns is his country is way more backwards than the rest of Europe. And it's way more backwards for a lot of reasons. What's the biggest problem with Russia? No. The nobles have too much power. So one thing Peter the Great is going to have to do is weaken the nobles. What else is a problem with Russian society? Who else has too much power? The church. The Russian Orthodox Church has too much power. So you gotta move on from those before you can ever talk about the economy. Right? So Peter the Great, what is his vocab word? What are the best vocab words of all the vocab? Westernization. Westernization. Okay. What do I mean by westernization? Weakening of the nobles, central power, weakening of the church, opening up trade. Let's go into some details. So, westernization, there's two things. Number one, what's the funniest story?
Hole in the wall.
What's the funniest actual story? Not braids. Beards. Same difference. When Peter the Great got off the boat after returning from his trip from Europe, he looked at the local servants that he had there and even the local nobles, and he ordered the men to shave their beards. Why is that such a big deal? Because why did the men have beards in the first place? The church requires it. But what he is saying is symbolically, I am the king. I have more power over you than the church. You will listen to me and my law, a lot of the stupid laws that the church is having you do. The other thing he does to westernize is what? St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg serves two purposes. The first purpose has to do with the biggest problem Peter the Great faces. So, what's the biggest problem Peter the Great faces? Nobles. How does St. Petersburg solve that problem? Much like Versailles, Peter the Great requires the nobles to pack up and leave and come to a new place, his place, where his rules matter. Okay? So the other reason St. Petersburg helps is what? It's a warm water port. Where was Peter's favorite country? Netherlands. Why? Shipbuilding. He enjoyed shipbuilding. He understood its importance. And the final point is after Peter the Great dies, who carries on his legacy? Catherine. Catherine the Great. If we want to give her a title in history, draw a line over to enlightened despots. Catherine the Great, enlightened despot. Or enlightened monarch. Sorry, despot, monarch means the same things here. There is one last country. We're just going to get done on time. The outlier, the weird one. Is purple going to work? You guys see that? This also goes in the same region, but if you can't fit it, write it off like to the right or someplace. So it should, time-wise, it should go really Louis XIV, Peter the Great, and what country are we going to talk about now? England. It really should go in the same region, but I understand a lot of you are running out of time, or running out of space. So we have England, and what is special about England? What's special about England compared to everybody else we've talked about? What?
They're doing well.
The title of this timeline is Absolutism. England is the country that does not fall. They are not going to fall to absolutism. Okay? That's very, very, very significant. And there's one key reason why. So we'll get there. First off, Alvaro, England had a big problem in the early 1600s. Why did they have a big problem? Because Elizabeth dies in 1603. Elizabeth was a wonderful leader. The big problem when she dies, though, is what, anybody? There's no clear succession. She never had a son. She never had any children. She never even married. So, does it go to cousins? Does it go to sisters? Does it go to aunts? There's really nobody left. So, England calls up their close neighbor, Scotland, and they say, hey, can we borrow some monarchs, right? And what is the name of these monarchs? Stuarts. There's 4 of them, but there's only 2 names to know. Charles and James. When the Stuarts showed up, they were crowned king. You remember when they had their parade through the streets? I think it was Charles I was the first, I could be wrong. Remember what he said? His aide was with him, and all the people are lining the sides and cheering him, and he's riding the thing. Yeah, well, he said, why don't you stand up and wave to your people, king? And the king was like, why don't I drop my pants? And they can wave to my bottom, right? That was his attitude. When he showed up at Parliament the first day, what do you think he says? Screw you guys! I'm the king! Look at all the other kings around Europe! We're going to do what I say from now on. That's what Louis XIV did. That's what Peter the Great did. That's what many other people did. The difference here, though, is this isn't everybody else. This is England. So, we have now the reason England doesn't fall to absolutism is because their parliament is too strong, too powerful, too entrenched. And most people support it. What's the problem with the other parliaments? What's the problem with the Estates General in France? Most people hate it. The only people who like it are who? The nobles. What's the problem with whatever the parliament is in Russia? Most of the world, most of the country hates it. The only people who like it are the nobles. So it's easy to get rid of those. Parliament, though, has the support of most people. So when the king says, screw you, Parliament, Parliament doesn't just back down. We end up with what event? English Civil War. The English Civil War is the king people versus the parliament people. They're the Roundheads versus the parliamentarians. They're the Cavaliers versus the something. I don't care. Doesn't matter, right? But this English Civil War. The winners will, of course, be Parliament because this is England and they win, right? But the problem is they're really weak when they're done. So what ends up happening? the guy who's in charge of the military just becomes the ruler. That guy's name is Oliver Cromwell. If you remember anything about him, he was like super Protestant, super religious, outlawed sport, wanted to outlaw dancing, all this other junk. Not really that well liked, but at least everything was stable. He, however, dies. Do you remember what happened when he dies?
Everyone has to put his head on a church.
Well, we put his head on a spike. We put that spike on Westminster Abbey where it stayed until the 1900s. So anyway, they forgot, literally put his head on a spike and forgot about it. Cromwell eventually dies, though. And when Cromwell dies, England doesn't have a problem with kings, right? And they need a monarchy. Still today, they have a monarchy. So when Cromwell dies, what does England do? Yeah, they call the Stuarts back. Where else are they going to get kings from? By this time, the old Stuart was dead, had his head chopped off. They say, new Stuarts, will you come back and be king? And the Stuarts are like, I don't know, you chopped the head off the last one. And England is like, listen, will you just not be a jerk and listen to Parliament? And the Stuarts are like, yeah, sure. So the Stuarts come back. But when the Stuarts come back, they stand in front of Parliament. What do they say? Screw you, Parliament. I'm in charge. Look at the rest of the world. They're way better with absolute monarchs, so I'm going to be in charge. Tensions grew and grew and grew, and we were building towards another civil war. But this is England. They don't fight that many civil wars. What's the event called? The Glorious Revolution. Why is it called the Glorious Revolution? Nobody dies. Basically, Parliament says to the king, I think it's James II, they say, hey, James, we're going to have to kill you if you don't leave. And James says, all right, I step down, meaning I what? Abdicate, good vocab word, I abdicate my power, and he goes and runs away and stays in France for a while. The problem for England now after the Glorious Revolution is there's still a gaping hole for them, right? So what do? They need a new king and queen. They call up their only favorite place in the world, their little brother, the Netherlands, and they borrow what two people you know their name? William and Mary. What's their last name or their house name? Orange. I would know Orange. Oh. And one of the very first things these kings agree to do, big star right here. What sets England apart from many of the other countries is they pass the English Bill of Rights. That no matter what, the king and Parliament have to follow. Nobody is allowed to change that. It is very similar to what America will make. Right? The President, the Congress, whatever they do, they cannot cheat the Bill of Rights. And my last point is what famous author is writing during the English Civil War? Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes. What's his book? You should know his book. Leviathan. And he said people are naturally greedy. They're selfish. If you let them all go out in the world, it would be chaotic. What kind of government do you need? According to Hobbes, you need a single absolute monarch to control the greed of men. If you don't have that, then it's a state of nature, and you all know what the state of nature is called. What's our term? Nasty, brutish, and short. Write that down. Nasty, brutish, and short. It's a very depressing, but arguably extremely accurate view of human society. And my second to super last point is who's writing during the Glorious Revolution? John Locke. John Locke doesn't say we're naturally evil. John Locke says that we grow and we develop based on our experiences. What are we when we are born? Write this one down. Tabula rasa, blank slate. My super duper pooper last point is when we get to the 1700s, England has gone through a glorious revolution, has a stable government. What's England doing in the late 16, early 1700s?
Getting ready to make some steel.
Agricultural revolution, industrial revolution. You guys had a question today. That's when England really starts to dominate exploration and colonialism. France in the 1700s loses their greatest leader, and what happens? They go down. Finally, and it is a key concept, what is the greatest sign that these two countries are crossing paths? In the 1760s, what do? 7 Years' War, which is really a Europe and colonial war. In America, we call it what? French and Indian War. Who wins that? England. It is our sign that for a while, England has finally passed France. I hope this helps. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day.